Good morning, everyone. Today, I have for you a very well-known passage, which is Luke 2, 1-7. And it goes like this. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem in the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. And he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Well, this is a short and well-known passage, and I'm overjoyed to be given it, because it's actually one of the greatest historical conundrums of the Gospels, and you wouldn't believe how much first ink has been spilt and now blogs written over this passage. I've even found a web page with pictures of 5 eminent biblical archaeologists on it, all giving their views, and each one of them was dressed as Indiana Jones, complete with the hat and the stubble. It's just like you couldn't have made it up. Now, the problem is this. That story we've just read of Jesus' birth, we know it takes place in the reign of Herod the Great. Luke starts by staying in the time of Herod in chapter 1. And Matthew's story of the 3 wise men, of course, features Herod. Now, Herod dies in 4 BC. So, Jesus must have been born before 4 BC. But Luke also says that the birth happens when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And we know a lot about Quirinius. He's born in 45 BC, he's a successful general. He's appointed mentor to Gaius Caesar, who's the grandson of the Emperor Augustus and Augustus's intended successor. Now, unfortunately, Gaius never gets to become emperor because he dies before Augustus in 3 AD. And in 6 AD, Quirinius is made emperor of Syria. And one of the first things he does on taking office is taking a census. And this is when we say he's governor of Syria, the other thing that happens in 6 AD is that Judea, where our action is of course set, becomes part of the province of Syria, because Herod the Great's son, who's also called Herod Archaeus, because everyone has to be called Herod if you are ruling this kingdom, was removed from power in AD 6. So if he's doing a census, it includes doing Judea. So do you see the problem? Jesus cannot be born before 4 BC and after 6 AD. You can't be born twice. Well, you can actually. And the census always also raised eyebrows. Surely if Augustus had ordered an empire-wide census where everyone had to go to their town of their ancestors, we'd know about it from other sources. Just think of the havoc it would have caused. The whole empire upping sticks and going back to where they came from. Why would you need to do it anyway? If you're trying to tax people, you tax them where they normally live, not where their ancestors live. Now, there is no external evidence ever since outside Luke for an census of the entire Roman world in the reign of Augustus. But we know he performed something called the lustrum 3 times during his reign, 28 BC, 8 BC, 4 AD. That is a census roll of Roman citizens. There's about 4 million of them each time. But it's not a tax census. It's only a register of who has Roman citizenship rights. And of course, In the Roman world, citizenship is a very privileged position that only a few people had, not everyone in the empire. Censuses of individual provinces for tax purposes were reasonably common, but you don't go back to your place of ancestry. There are a few known injunctions, including one from Egypt in AD 103, which say people have to return home for the census. And some people have said, oh, well, that means that the journey made by Mary and Joseph and Luke, well, that, it's doing that sort of thing. But that's a document telling people to do the opposite. It's telling people to stay at home, at their normal home for a census, not travel miles and miles away to where the great-grandmothers come from. So what are we to make of all these questions? Did Luke get his history wrong, and does it matter? Well, there's three ways of answering this problem, and I'll call them the historian's approach, the hardcore evangelical approach, and the softcore evangelical approach. The historian takes sources, tries to make the best of them. Where there looks to be a conflict, they normally assume that one of their sources has made an error. Now, that's easily done, especially in the ancient world where you can't check things in libraries or use the internet. Now, if Luke is mistaken about his census and who was governor, it does not mean that the rest of the Gospels is fiction. An account is only as good as the sources on which it's based. It would be reasonable to assume that the sources at Luke's disposal for Jesus' early life are not as good as those for his ministry. After all, no one knew at the time he was born quite how important he was going to turn out to be. Interestingly, this approach is taken by Tertullian, one of the church fathers, who writes in 197 AD. He, of course, knows Luke's gospel very well, but he states that Jesus was born when Sentius Saturnius was governor of Syria. And we know what that was. That was between 9 and 7 BC. And he's not the least bothered by contradicting Luke at this point, because no one has come up with the doctrine of inerrancy of Scripture. You'd have to wait another 1,600 years for that to happen. So for him, he's not hung up about it. Let's look at the hardcore evangelical approach. Now, they don't have the option of saying, oh, Luke got it wrong, because they believe Scripture is inerrant. It can't be wrong. So they come up with ingenious solutions. They argue we don't have a full biography of Quirinius. He could have had 2 terms of governor, or he could have been wielding power unofficially in Syria before 4 BC. They point to a text of this, the text saying this is the first census when Quirinius was governor of Syria. So the census everyone knows about in AD 6 must be the second. Creative use is often made of other Roman documents. For instance, a tombstone found in Rome has been interpreted as Quirinius's and says that he was legate of Syria twice. But it's a fragment of tombstone. And it takes a bit of creativity to conclude this because the owner's name is missing. Now, one of these solutions may be correct. All are possible. There is not a lot we do not know about the ancient world. But the problem with this approach is the explanations can seem a bit baroque and less plausible than the simplest, that Luke just made a small error. Doing history with a very strong prior belief that one of your sources is inerrant and therefore must be right no matter where the evidence leads is not a recipe for doing good history. It's something else. Now, then there's the soft evangelical approach, which says this is a riddle that cannot be solved satisfactorily given the evidence that we have before us. But we know that the Bible is inerrant. We just can't see how to resolve this particular problem. Maybe one day more evidence will come to light. Which of these solutions is the best? Well, I'll leave you to decide on that. But I think it does matter because how Christians think about these things has an impact on the way the church relates to the wider world. We have to be careful of taking a stance which is sort of equivalent to saying, we've got a magic book that's always right. And when asked why our magic book is always right, we say, because that's an article of faith for us, because we believe it. Because it's very difficult for people who don't have that mindset to engage with. And if we as a church become dependent on magical thinking that stands in opposition to the norms of logic, science, and historical inquiry, we are doomed to become a fringe cult that only those who are able to suspend their critical faculties and can live with a lot of cognitive distance, that's trying to hold two contradictory principles at once, can join. And I don't think we ought to be that. And that's all I have for you.